Abu Jamal. We were going to have Minister King X speak and give a short presentation about the hunger strike. He was a participant in the strike, but unfortunately he's not quite here yet. So we are going to have a short presentation on that later on in this panel. Turning to the subject of the panel now, as you can all see, from the title of this book, The Case of Mumia Abu Jamal 40 Years Later, Eliot's book is about the history of Mumia's case. It starts in December 9th, 1981, when a white Philadelphia police officer was murdered, and Mumia was shot, beaten by the Philadelphia police, and framed for the killing. And it goes through Mumia's trial, his appeal, 6 state post-conviction petitions, and numerous appeals to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. It's also a political history of the present and continuing struggle to free Mumia. But one of the things that I find most interesting about Eliot's book is that in addition to being these things, it's also a partial contribution to the history of the revolutionary wing of the Mumia movement. This is a book written by a lawyer, but Mumia was not just defended legally. Mumia was defended politically. He was defended by activists, organizers, trade unionists, the people who get up on the flatbed truck with the megaphone, the pamphleteers, the people who write the articles, the people who draft the flyers and do the graphic design, who do the media so that we can get the message out, the theoreticians, as well as some lawyers. These people, some of them acted individually, some of them participated in organizations which we call parties, which followed a political line based on the principles of the class struggle as given to us by Marx and Engels. Some of those people are here in this room today. Others are present on Zoom. Despite sometimes very severe, and I might say even vicious political differences, these revolutionaries did have agreement on one point. The Mumia needed a class struggle defense. And for some of us, that meant a defense along the lines of the International Labor Defense, headed by James P. Cannon, which originally defended Sacco and Vanzetti, as well as the Scottsboro Boys. James P. Cannon gave the line of the International Labor Defense as this: "Our policy is the policy of the class struggle. It puts the center of gravity in the protest movement of the workers of America and the world. It puts all faith in the power of the masses and no faith whatsoever in the justice of the courts. While favoring all possible legal proceedings, it calls for agitation, publicity, demonstrations, organized protest on a national and international scale. It calls for unity and solidarity of all workers on this burning issue, regardless of conflicting views on other questions." The revolutionaries who defended Mumia defended him to the extent that they were able and to the extent that they understood the line, and they tried to implement it on the actual terrain of the class struggle. And the result of that effort was that the international working class moved. The workers moved in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, internationally. And against great odds, they did save Mumia's life. I'm going to introduce Eliot now. Attorney Eliot Lee Grossman has been practicing law for 45 years. He is admitted to practice law in the state of California and before the United States Supreme Court, the federal courts of appeal for the 3rd and 9th circuits, and all federal district courts in the state of California. Eliot, along with co-counsel Marlene Kamish, Nick Brown, and J. Michael Farrell, and legal assistant Tracy Kostenbader, represented Mumia Abu Jamal in state and federal post-conviction proceedings from May 2001 to October 2003. During that time, building on legal and investigative work done by the Partisan Defense Committee, they saved Mumia's life, convincing a federal judge, Judge Yohn, to overturn his death sentence. That decision was later twice upheld on appeal. Elliot was radicalized as a college student in the 1960s by the anti-Vietnam War movement, tear-gassed at the March on the Pentagon, and was introduced to Marxism by his philosophy professor, who taught him Hegelian dialectics. As a law student, he worked as a law clerk to Charles Gary, chief counsel for the Black Panther Party on the San Quentin Six case. Later, as a young attorney, he served as an associate at the LA law firm of longtime radical lawyers Ben Margolis and John McTernan. He is an academic member of the Permanent Seminar for Chicano and Border Studies, an interdisciplinary research center in the Department of Ethnology and Social Anthropology of the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico City. He has taught at the United States International University and the University of the Americas in Mexico City, UC Irvine, and People's College of Law in Los Angeles. He has also served as a legal consultant to the Mexican government's National Human Rights Commission on U.S. immigration law and policy, and to the Oscar Grant Committee in Oakland, California, on police abuse. I'm very happy to introduce my friend and comrade, Elliot Grossman.
Thank you, Richard. Prize-winning radio journalist, author of 13 books, honorary citizen of Paris, ex-member of the Black Panther Party, and supporter of the MOVE organization, with a Master of Arts degree in comparative literature, Mumia Abu-Jamal has spent over 40 years in prison and narrowly escaped execution for a crime he did not commit: the shooting death of a white police officer, Daniel Faulkner, in downtown Philadelphia on December 9th, 1981. Mumia is innocent. He was framed up by a combination of corrupt police and prosecutorial misconduct. It is impossible in the short time available to me this afternoon to share with you the entirety of the story told in my book. For that, you have to read the book, and I hope that everyone will. What I'm going to do today is share with you some of the key elements in the story. I will begin by identifying the basic ingredients in the recipe that was used to manufacture guilt in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Number one, the racist judge. Mumia's trial was Mumia's trial was presided over by a racist judge, Albert Sabo, who was overheard by a court reporter saying, in reference to Mumia, that he was, quote, going to help him, referring to the prosecution, going to help him fry the Niger. But Judge Sabo did not spell it out. He just said it. Number two, the racially cleansed jury. Welcome. The prosecutor racially cleansed the jury by using his peremptory challenges during jury selection to remove 10 out of 15 Black potential jurors because of their race, in violation of the United States Supreme Court decision in the landmark case of Batson versus United States. Number three, the ineffective assistance by counsel. Mumia was represented by a young and inexperienced appointed attorney who lacked the courage to stand up to Judge Sabo. When we interviewed this attorney years later, he had turned tragically into a crackhead, was disbarred, and was working as a construction laborer, and could not conduct more than a brief and superficial conversation without becoming completely incoherent. Number four, the violation of Mumia's right to represent himself. When Mumia tried to exercise his constitutional right to represent himself, Judge Sabo provoked a legal argument with him over whether he had the right to have his non-lawyer friend, John Africa, founder of the MOVE organization, assist him at counsel table. And Judge Sabo used Mumia's insistence on that right as a pretext to claim he was being disruptive and to put his incompetent attorney back in charge of his case and his trial. Judge Sabo used the same pretext to actually exclude Mumia from over half of his trial, so that he was essentially convicted and sentenced to death in absentia. Number 5, the eyewitnesses who did not see the shooting. Mumia was wrongfully convicted of shooting Officer Faulkner to death based on the perjured testimony of 2 purported eyewitnesses, neither of whom saw the shooting, but both of whom were particularly vulnerable to the district attorney's carrot and stick tactics to get them to say what the DA wanted. The first witness was Cynthia White. Cynthia White was an African-American sex worker who had several pending prostitution cases against her in the Philadelphia courts, as well as out-of-state arrest warrants at the time of Mumia's trial. She could have been imprisoned for many years had the district attorney not had every one of those cases dismissed in exchange for her perjured testimony. Yvette Williams, who, like Cynthia White, was an African-American sex worker, came forward after our legal team took over as Mumia's attorneys. And I should explain that our legal team consisted of Chicago attorney Marlene Kamish, who was in private practice after having worked for a number of years in the elite Supreme Court unit of the death penalty division of the State Public Defender's Office in Illinois. London barrister Nick Brown was a member of our legal team. He had previously worked on the Birmingham 6 case in England, where 6 Irishmen were framed up by the British government for allegedly blowing up some working class pubs in England, and they were in prison for, I think, about 10 years before their convictions were finally overturned. Mike Farrell was a Philadelphia attorney that we brought into our legal team as our legal counsel, since we were not attorneys in the state of Pennsylvania. And legal assistant Tracy Kostenbader, who worked with Marlene Kamish and was not only a legal assistant, but a community organizer, was another indispensable member of our team. So one of the things that happened when we took over Mumia's case is that this woman, Yvette Williams, came forward and got in contact with us and told us that she was actually in jail with Cynthia White at the time of Mumia's trial, and that Cynthia White confessed to her that she did not even see the shooting, but the police were threatening to send her away to prison for many years if she did not testify that Mumia shot Officer Faulkner. In Yvette Williams' declaration under penalty of perjury that we filed in court, and to which there is a link in my book if you'd like to read it yourself, she explains that Cynthia White, quote, was worried the police would kill her if she didn't say what they wanted. She was scared when she told me all of this. Plus, she was crying and shaking. Whenever she talked about testifying against Mumia Abu Jamal and how the police were making her lie, she was nervous and very excited. And I could tell how scared she was from the way she was talking and crying. Yvette Williams said that when police detectives came to talk with Cynthia White in jail, They always brought her all kinds of contraband that wasn't actually permitted in the jail, including cigarettes, candy, hoagies, syringes, and some kind of white powder, maybe similar to the powder they just discovered in Biden's White House. I don't know. The second witness who lied at trial and gave perjured testimony against Mumia, claiming that they had seen the shooting and saw Mumia shoot the police officer, which turned out to be completely untrue. That witness is named Robert Chobert. Robert Chobert was on felony probation for firebombing a school. Seriously. I mean, you could not even make this up. He was on felony probation for firebombing a school. And not only that, he was in daily violation of his probation because it's a standard probation condition that you have to, quote, obey all laws. Robert Chobert was driving his taxi cab on a suspended driver's license. That's a violation of the law. Had the district attorney brought this to the attention of a judge, instead of ignoring it, Chobert could have been sentenced back to prison for the remainder of his 30-year term that he was originally sentenced to for firebombing that school. After our legal team took over Mumia's case from Leonard Weinglass and Dan Williams, which I will have more to say about a little later in my presentation, but after that happened and we were on the case, private investigator Mike Newman, who had worked for Weinglass's team, told me that Robert Chobert actually recanted his trial testimony years before to Mike Newman. And Robert Chobert admitted to Mike Newman that he did not see the shooting and he was not really parked behind Officer Faulkner's patrol car as he had testified to at trial. Now, this shocked me when Mike Newman told this to me because I had seen no mention of Robert Chobert having taken back his trial testimony in any of the court records, in any of the newspaper articles, and there was nothing about that in the files of Leonard Weinglass and Robert Chobert. And they had boxes and boxes of files that they had to turn over to us when we took over the case. So I asked Mike Newman to explain more of this to me, and Mike Newman said that when Leonard Weinglass, famous radical lawyer, Leonard Weinglass, when Leonard Weinglass actually put Robert Chobert on the witness stand at post-conviction proceedings in 1995 before Judge Sabo, Mike Newman himself was actually sitting in the courthouse, in the hall, outside the courtroom where that hearing was going on. And the reason that Mike Newman was there was so that if Chobert denied having recanted his trial testimony, Mike Newman could then have testified that, yes, Robert Chobert recanted that testimony to me. However, after Chobert left the witness stand, Leonard Weinglass went up to Mike Newman and told him that he could leave now and it wasn't necessary for him to testify because Weinglass had, quote, gotten everything he needed, unquote, out of Chobert. And Mike Newman asked me, what did Chobert say during his testimony? I've been wondering about this, for years, ever since, Leonard Weinglass said, go home, you don't have to testify. Now, when Mike Newman told me this shocked me even more. I mean, this blew my mind. As we used to say in the 60s, this freaked me out, man, because I had recently reread all of Chobert's testimony at that hearing, and I knew that Leonard Weinglass did not ask Chobert anything about having taken back his trial testimony. Nothing at all. I told Newman this, And he was even more freaked out than I was. So we agreed that I would send him the transcript of Chobert's testimony, and Mike Newman agreed that he would give us a declaration under penalty of perjury, saying in it exactly what he had just said to me. And we filed Newman's declaration in court, and there is a link to that also in my book. Chobert's recantation was later corroborated by photographs taken at the crime scene by a freelance photographer, Phil Polikoff, shortly after the shooting. And those photographs showed that Chobert's cab was not parked behind Faulkner's patrol car. There was no car behind Faulkner's patrol car at the crime scene immediately after the shooting. Michael Schiffman, who is a Mumia supporter from Germany, discovered those photos while researching his PhD thesis, and he gave them to attorney Robert Bryant, who took over Mumia's representation after our legal team. But Robert Bryant never filed those photographs in any court. Number 6, the phony confession. Several months after Officer Faulkner was killed, Prosecutor Joe McGill called a meeting with police who were present at the crime scene when the officer was shot, afterwards, so they could get their story together before Mumia's trial started. And literally out of the blue, a couple of police officers came up with something that not any of them had ever mentioned before. Supposedly, according to these police officers, they just remembered several months later that when they dumped Mumia on the floor of the hospital emergency room, when they took him to the hospital after the incident, because Mumia himself was shot, Mumia supposedly yelled out, "I shot the motherfucker and I hope he dies." Now, among the problems with this phony story they made up several months later that no one remembered and no one had ever reported before, this actually contradicts the written report from the 2 police officers who guarded Mumia the entire time he was in the hospital. And they filed a report which says, quote, "The male Negro made no statements," unquote. And if you think about it, if Mumia had actually said this right after one of their fellow police officers was shot to death, don't you think they would have beaten Mumia to death right then and there in a fit of rage? In addition to that, another witness came forward when we were on Mumia's case who proved that this entire confession story was a lie. And that witness was Kenneth Pate. Kenneth Pate was transferred to the same prison that Mumia was in, and he got word to Mumia that he knew something about his case that was important. And Mumia got in touch with us, and I flew out to Pittsburgh, and I went to the prison, and I interviewed Kenneth Pate right there in the prison. Kenneth Pate told me that his half-sister, Priscilla Durham, was working as a security guard at the hospital emergency room when the police brought Mumia in and dumped him on the floor. And although Priscilla Durham testified in support of the phony confession story at Mumia's trial, she admitted to her half-brother Kenneth Pate in a phone conversation that it was all a lie. And she recanted all of that trial testimony to him. What Priscilla Durham explained to Kenneth Pate was that the police told her that as a security guard, she was part of the Brotherhood of Police, and it was her duty to back them up. Kenneth Pate specifically asked her if she heard Mumia say that he killed the police officer. And Priscilla Durham replied, quote, "All I heard him say was, 'Get off me, they're trying to kill me,' unquote." Kenneth Pate's declaration is also, described in my book, and there is a link in the book to the declaration. If you want to pull it up on the internet, read it yourself. So this brings us to the question of what really happened on December 9th of 1981. So I'm going to read to you the first few paragraphs of my book in which I lay out what I put together from the evidence suppressed at trial and the additional evidence, and it's been a lot of it, that has come out since the trial. And here's the book. Police officer Daniel Faulkner had been trying unsuccessfully to get time off from his usual night shift on December the 8th of 1981, so he and his wife could see a show in downtown Philadelphia. Unlike his usual routine, he left his home that night in uniform and went directly out on patrol in his patrol car, instead of stopping first at the police station to change into his uniform and put on the bulletproof vest that was hanging in his locker. Between 3:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m. on December 9th, 1981, Officer Faulkner pulled over a VW Bug being driven by Mumia Abu Jamal's brother, Billy Cook, eastbound on Locust Street in the Center City area of downtown Philadelphia. Shortly after it crossed 13th Street, Faulkner called for backup and a paddy wagon after he stopped Cook's vehicle. The stop occurred in a neighborhood known for its after-hour clubs, gay bars, sex workers, and drug dealers. Like other nights, there were numerous people on the street when the clubs were closing. Cook and his partner, his business partner, Kenneth Freeman, operated a newsstand in the area. They had closed up for the night and had been out bar hopping when they were pulled over. It's possible that another person was in the car with them because Arnold Howard's driver license application, which in Pennsylvania serves as a temporary license, was found in Officer Faulkner's pocket after he was killed. Howard claimed not to have been present, however, and said that he had loaned the document to his friend, Kenneth Freeman. Billy Cook got out of his car when the officer pulled him over, exchanged words with Officer Faulkner, who hit him in the head with his flashlight and sent him back to the car for his registration. As Cook was searching for his registration, Kenneth Freeman, wearing a green army jacket, got out of the car, shots rang out, and Freeman disappeared. Freeman told Cook later that there was a plot to shoot Officer Faulkner that night, and that he, meaning Freeman, was part of the plot and participated in the shooting. When Faulkner was shot, he fell to one knee and then fell backwards on the sidewalk. Arnold Beverly, wearing a green army jacket, was waiting at the speed line entrance. The speed line is what they call the subway in Philadelphia. And the speed line entrance is right in front of a parking lot at 13th and Locust Street. Arnold Beverly ran over to Faulkner, stood over him, and shot him in the face. Police cars and foot patrol arrived almost immediately. Two undercover officers who were in the area and a uniformed officer who was in a car in the parking lot drew their guns and approached the scene. Beverly saw a white shirt, which is what they call the police supervisors in Philadelphia, because they wear white shirts as part of their uniform. At least they did in those days. Beverly saw a white shirt get out of a car in the middle of the 13th and Locust intersection, just as Beverly himself disappeared down the speed line steps into the subway entrance. Beverly walked several blocks underground and emerged from another subway entrance to be met by prearrangement by a police officer who helped him escape in a waiting car. Beverly and another man had been hired by corrupt police and organized crime to kill Faulkner because he was an obstacle to the payoffs racket they ran in Center City to allow illegal activity like prostitution and drug dealing in exchange for a share of the profits. You got to understand, in those days, and not sure what it's like now, but in those days, downtown Philadelphia was just like Tijuana. Like you go down in Tijuana, the police pull you over, first thing you do is you pay a bribe. Same thing in Philadelphia in that period. Now, before the shooting began, prize-winning radio journalist and ex-Black Panther, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was moonlighting as a cab driver that night, was parked on 13th Street, north of Locust, in front of Club Whispers, waiting for potential customers leaving the club. He heard shots, saw his brother standing in the street, ran to his brother, and was shot down by a uniformed police officer after Officer Faulkner was shot. We found Arnold Beverly's confession, in which he lays out his part in the murder of Officer Faulkner, hidden away in the files of Leonard Weinglass and Daniel Williams when Mumia fired them and retained us to take over his case. We also found in their files, hidden away, a declaration under penalty of perjury by Mumia's brother, Billy Cook, in which he discloses Kenneth Freeman's part in the murder. Weinglass and Williams never presented this evidence to any court, but we filed it in state and federal court and fought a desperate but ultimately losing battle to get the judges to consider it, which they refused to do because the short deadline to present such new evidence, which at that time was only 60 days, was blown long before by attorneys Weinglass and Williams. But we did succeed in our legal battle, supported by the movement and by class struggle legal defense. We did succeed in convincing the federal judge, Judge Yan, to overturn Mumia's death sentence, and we saved Mumia's life. That decision by Judge Yan has been upheld twice by the appellate courts in the years afterward. Now, the confession of Arnold Beverly was in the form of a declaration under penalty of perjury, where he swears under penalty of perjury everything is true, so it could be filed in court. And some of the members of the Labor Action Committee, when this story came out, suggested to us that we actually videotape Arnold Beverly reading his confession so they could use it as an organizing tool, which we immediately thought, what a great idea. But then we also thought, we're going to organize the judges too. We are going to file the videotape confession in court so the judges can actually see Arnold Beverly and hear Arnold Beverly confessing, just like you're going to see and hear right now, because we have the videotape of his confession and we're going to show it to you. And it is also available on the internet, and there's a link to it in my book. So please, comrade technicians, let's put up the Arnold Beverly confession.
I'm here to depose to the foregoing, and I'm willing to depose at any time in any courtroom of law. I, Arnold Beverly, state that the following facts are true and correct. I was present when Officer Daniel Faulkner was shot and killed in the early morning hours of December 9th, 1981, near the corner of 13th and Locust Street. I have personal knowledge that Mumia Abu Jamal did not shoot Officer Daniel Faulkner. In fact, I was hired, along with another guy, and paid to shoot and kill Officer Daniel Faulkner. I had heard that Faulkner was a problem for the mob and the corrupt policemen because he interfered with the graft and the payoff made to allow illegal activities, including prostitution, gambling, drugs, without prosecution in the Center City area. Faulkner was shot once in the back, then in the face, before Jamal came onto the scene. Again, Jamal had nothing to do with the shooting of Officer Faulkner. Before the shooting, I was given a picture. I was given a picture of Faulkner. I was told that he would be around Locust Street to check something out at Johnny D's bar in the early morning hours of December 9th. Two of us were hired for the shooting so that either of us could take the opportunity to make the hit, get the job done, and leave. The other guy gave me a .38 caliber policeman special. I also was carrying my own .22 caliber revolver. I was waiting at the speed line entrance, northeast corner of 13th and Locust Streets, at the parking lot. I was wearing a green camouflage jacket. The other guy was at the south side of Locust Street, east of 13th Street, near Kamak. While I was waiting at the speed line for Faulkner to arrive on the location, I saw police officers in the area. Two undercover policemen were standing on the west side of 13th Street. Also, a uniformed officer was sitting in a car at the parking lot. They were there while the shooting of Faulkner took place. I was not worried about the police there, since I believed that since I was hired by the mob to shoot and kill Faulkner, any police officer that was there were there to help me and protect me. After a while, I saw Faulkner get out of a small police car behind a VW parked on Locust Street, east of 13th. Faulkner was alone. He got out of the police car and went up to the VW. I heard a shot ring out from east on Locust Street. Faulkner fell to one knee on the sidewalk next to the VW. I heard another shot, and it must have grazed my left shoulder. I felt something on my left shoulder. I grabbed at my shoulder and got blood on my hands. I ran across the street, stood over top of Faulkner, and shot him in the face at close range. Jamal was shot shortly after that by a uniformed police officer who arrived on the scene. Cop cars came from all directions. Foot patrol also arrived. I saw a white shirt, brass, getting out of a car in the middle of 13th Street, just as I was going down the speed line steps. I left the area underground through the speed line system, and by prearrangement, a police officer who assisted me when I exited the speed line underground about 1 block away, a car was waiting for me, and I left the Center City area.
It was Rachel Walkenstein, an attorney from the Partisan Defense Committee, who's going to be participating with us today via Zoom, who obtained Arnold Beverly's confession and Billy Cook's declaration, and whose years of investigative efforts directing a team of PDC volunteers and licensed professional investigators unearthed the mountains of evidence which corroborates Beverly's and Cook's account of what happened. When we found Arnold Beverly's confession and Billy Cook's declaration and Leonard Weinglass's files, we immediately called up Rachel Walkenstein and asked her, what happened here? What is going on? Why weren't these documents filed in court within that short deadline? When Leonard Weinglass and Daniel Williams refused to use this evidence that Rachel and the PDC had uncovered, she and Jonathan Piper, who was another PDC attorney working on the legal defense team, resigned from the legal team because they could not go along with this betrayal of Mumia. So I'm going to leave it to Rachel to tell you more about this, and you can hear the story directly from her. Now, I mentioned that our legal team took over Mumia's representation after he fired Leonard Weinglass and Daniel Williams. So the question is, why did Mumia fire famous radical lawyer Leonard Weinglass and his associate Daniel Williams? Well, the reason was that Mumia found out that Daniel Williams was about to publish a book about his case entitled Executing Justice, for which Williams was promised by the publisher a $30,000 advance. And by the way, this book is available for free to be downloaded from the website of the Bolshevik Tendency, www.bolsheviktendency.org. And also, some of you have received it by email. You can download it, email it to anybody that you think might be interested. The hard copy of the book has been donated by me, basically, to the Labor Action Committee so they can sell it for whatever they want to sell it for. I do not receive 1 penny for this book. So Mumia finds out that Dan Williams is about to publish this book and wants to see a copy of it and read it before it goes out publicly. They finally give him the book. Mumia sits down and he reads the whole book through, and he immediately after that files his own motion by himself with the federal judge, Judge Jan, and asks for permission to fire Leonard Weinglass and Dan Williams and hire or retain other attorneys. And Jan grants his motion, gives him 30 days to hire a new legal team. And he asked us if we would take over his case, which I'll explain in a moment. And of course, we agreed. But I also want to explain something. Williams' book violated the rules of professional conduct for an attorney, which specifically say you cannot even contract to publish a book about an active case that you are still working on because there's an inherent conflict of interest. But the situation with that book is even worse than this legal technicality, if you want to call it that, because in Daniel Williams' book, he suggests in various devious ways that Mumia is actually guilty of shooting Officer Faulkner. And I don't want you to take my word for this, and you don't necessarily have to read Williams' book, which is available for about $5 used on Amazon, but you can go on Amazon.com and you can read the 5-star review of the book that was done by somebody named Brian, who wrote the following quote: "It provides a damning account of the Free Mumia movement and really leaves little doubt in the reader's mind that whether or not Abu Jamal received a fair trial, he almost certainly shot Officer Daniel Faulkner." Now, as I explained, I didn't explain. Well, as I did explain, Mumia asked us to take over the case. The reason that happened was that our legal team had previously filed amicus briefs, which are also called friend of the court's briefs, before the federal judge in support of Mumia. Nick Brown filed a brief on behalf of 22 members of the British Parliament, including at that time the young Jeremy Corbyn. Marlene and I filed a brief on behalf of Professor Rudy Acuña's on behalf of Rudy Acuña's Foundation for Chicano Studies, which is a whole other story, which is in the book, and I don't have time to go into. And because we'd established that relationship with Mumia, he asked us to take over his case. Now, this brings us up to the present, basically. So approximately 6 years ago, Mumia's present attorneys, Judith Ritter, a law professor at University of Delaware Law School, and Sam Spital from the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, who have since been joined by a third attorney, Brett Grote from the Abolitionist Law Center, filed a 5th state post-conviction petition in support of Mumia based on a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case of Williams versus Pennsylvania. In Williams, the court ruled it was a violation of the defendant's right to have his appeal heard by an impartial tribunal because Ronald Castile, who had been Philadelphia's district attorney at the time of this defendant's trial and had actually authorized the prosecutor on the case to seek the death penalty in that case, then became a justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and was one of the justices who denied Mr. Williams' appeal. So it was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court this was a violation of constitutional rights. They overturned the conviction. So it just turns out that Mumia was in the same situation as Williams because Mumia had 4 different appeals before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court denied by a court that included Ronald Castile, even though Ronald Castile was the head district attorney at the time that Mumia's case was on direct appeal, and the brief of the district attorney's office that opposed his appeal had Ronald Castile's name on it as the head district attorney, and the flunkies under him, who actually did the case, were all listed also. Now, so they filed this petition in the Pennsylvania courts, and during the litigation over that petition, the district attorney was forced to hand over a letter that Castile had written in 1990 when he was district attorney to the governor of Pennsylvania, urging him to expedite signing death warrants for the death sentences, and specifically, and most importantly, for people convicted of murdering a police officer, who he referred to, of course, as cop killers. We want to send a message to the cop killers. So Mumia's attorneys asked Judge Tucker for authorization to amend their petition and add another claim based on that letter that Castile had sent, specifically accusing him of judicial bias, and therefore another reason to overturn Mumia's conviction. So what eventually happened is that the African-American judge, Judge Tucker, who was hearing this petition, wound up denying the claim based on Williams because he said that he had not seen enough evidence to show that Castile actually had some direct personal involvement in Mumia's case when he was head district attorney. But he granted the other new claim based on the 1990 letter, saying that it showed at least an appearance of a lack of impartiality and bias, and that was enough to overturn the conviction. So what Judge Tucker decided is, since Mumia had had 4 appeals denied by Castile and the rest of them, that Mumia could actually relitigate every single legal claim that he had raised in those previous 4 appeals, one of which was the appeal that our legal team had taken to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which they denied. Now, Mumia's attorneys, his present attorneys, out of all those issues, picked 6 legal issues to relitigate. They decided not to relitigate all of them, and they also decided not to relitigate the issue of innocence that we had raised, and not to relitigate any of the legal issues that we raised. But they picked 6 issues and they filed them to proceed in relitigating them. But then what happened is the Court of Appeal that was hearing these 6 issues in Pennsylvania sent the case back to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court because they weren't sure if they had jurisdiction over it. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sent it back to them and said, we want you to look at whether these issues are even timely, if they were really brought up on time, because if they're not timely, then you got to deny them because you don't have jurisdiction or power to hear these issues. So the district attorney's office, under the newly elected progressive district attorney, Larry Krasner, this is a new fad now. We're getting all these progressive district attorneys. So the progressive Larry Krasner had his, district attorney who were working on the case file a motion to dismiss all those claims without even considering them on the grounds that they were somehow untimely, picking it up from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, picking up the timeliness shibboleth, and they concocted a completely dishonest and illogical argument, which the Court of Appeal further elaborated. And on that basis, they dismissed the claims, all 6 of them, without considering any of them on the merits. Now, I don't have sufficient time this afternoon, but she's telling me I'm running out of time here to explain to you the reasoning by which the Court of Appeal in Pennsylvania magically transformed a timely petition into an untimely one. And I don't have enough time right now to deconstruct the faulty logic of the court. But if you're interested in all of that, it's in my book. So read the book. Mumia's attorneys, rather than appealing this decision to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, filed a 6th post-conviction petition based on documents they found in 6 boxes of district attorney files that during the litigation on the 5th petition were stumbled upon by Larry Krasner himself when he went to some off-site warehouse for used office equipment that the district attorney's office maintained, and he found 3 boxes of files from Mumia's trial, 6 boxes of district attorney's files from Mumia's trial from 20 years ago. And they were labeled like 1 out of 24, 2 out of 24, 5 out of 24, which indicates that there's 19 boxes still missing out there someplace. And then there was another box that didn't have a number on it, but they found a bunch of documents and they used those documents, some of them, to raise 3 new claims in Mumia's case. And those are the claims that are still being dealt with. Claim number 1 is based on prosecutor Joe McGill's jury selection notes, which show that he was tracking the race of potential jurors by writing a B after the names of the black ones and a W after the names of the white ones. So these notes provide new evidence to support the Batson claim that the prosecutor took African-American jurors off the jury because of their race. Claim number 2 is based on internal memos of the district's attorney's office to the prosecutors on Cynthia White's pending prostitution cases, telling them not to do anything on the cases without checking with Joe McGill first, who was Mumia's prosecutor. And lo and behold, all of those cases wound up being dismissed. So that is a violation of another U.S. Supreme Court case called Brady versus Maryland, under which the district attorney's office was obligated to inform Mumia's trial attorney at the time of the trial that they had this deal with Cynthia White to dismiss her cases in exchange for her testimony. Claim number 3 is based on a letter that Robert Schobert, our firebombing cab driver, sent to prosecutor Joe McGill after he got off the witness stand, asking when he was going to get the money he was owed, apparently in exchange for his testimony, which provides new evidence of the prosecution violating Brady, because that had to have been disclosed also to the defense. The judge hearing these new claims, Judge Clemens, a young black woman, unfortunately did not follow the example of Judge Tucker, and her phony progressive image has been shattered by the pathetically dishonest and illogical decision in which she dismissed all three of these claims without directly considering them. She denied the Batson claim, number one, on the basis it was supposedly waived by Mumia's trial attorney because he didn't object to the prosecutor's exercise of the peremptory challenges at the time. But the Batson case had not even been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court at the time of Mumia's trial. When the decision came down, the U.S. Supreme Court said this applies retroactively to cases, before we came down with the decision, as long as they're still pending. So it does apply to Mumia's case. But how's the prosecutor supposed to know that unless they got, the defense attorney know that unless they got a crystal ball? So this is ridiculous. She also denied it because Leonard Weinglass did not put the prosecutor on the witness stand in the post-conviction hearings and ask him why he excused all these jurors. But that's actually the prosecution's burden to do that, for him to explain away with whatever lies he's going to tell. It's not the obligation of the defense to do that. The second thing that the judge did, Judge Clemens, is she denied the claim about Cynthia White because she said that Cynthia White's testimony was so unbelievable anyway at trial that no jury would have believed her anyway, so more evidence about Cynthia White wouldn't have made any difference. But what this ignores is that if the jurors had decided Cynthia White was lying on the witness stand under oath, obviously this woman had no reason to lie on her own. The only reason she would have lied is if the police and the prosecutor either bribed her to lie or forced her to lie or did both, which in fact is what they did. And then she decided that Chobert's letter was not really significant, so she dismissed that claim because the prosecutor said that he only told Chobert he was going to look into whether the guy could get paid for his lost earnings or not, and he never actually promised any money. But the problem is, it's against the law to offer a witness any money other than the statutory witness fee they're entitled to, which is something like $8 or $12. So just by saying he would look into it, that was an implicit bribe right there. Now, Judge Clemens' decision is on appeal to the Court of Appeal. If Mumia's attorneys are unsuccessful in their efforts to overturn Judge Clemens in the state courts, and if the U.S. Supreme Court refuses to hear the case, and they only take a few hundred of the thousands of cases that ask to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court, the last step available under, the legal system would be for Mumia's attorneys to go to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals for that area, and ask for permission to file a second federal habeas petition, because the first one was filed by Weinglass. And under Bill Clinton's Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act that he signed into law, in order to file a second or a third or a fourth or whatever, a later, they call it a successive habeas petition, you have to get permission from the Court of Appeal, and the only way you can get it is by proving that the person is innocent. You have to prove that if a jury were to hear this new evidence that you want to bring up, no reasonable juror would vote to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. So in other words, at that point, they will have to reinsert into Mumia's case the innocence issue that we raised originally, that has been completely abandoned by all the lawyers since then and by all of the movement, with the exception of the Labor Action Committee and other, revolutionary legal defense, class struggle legal defense people. Now, I am getting notice that I have run out of time. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that Mumia's case is a political case. As such, it needs to be fought politically, inside and outside the courtroom, in order to win. Mumia's innocence needs to be at the center of the campaign to win his freedom. And as I argue in my book, the campaign should be conducted on the basis of a class struggle legal defense, as James P. Cannon explained it to us, and as he did in the Sacco Vanzetti case, and in accordance with the quotation that Richard just read to you, which is in my book. So Now is the time to reignite an international movement to free Mumia Abu Jamal and link his case and the unjust imprisonment of other anti-racist and anti-imperialist activists to current struggles against U.S. imperialism abroad and for the rights of workers and minorities and other oppressed people in this country right now. By mobilizing workers and their allies to fight for these and other reforms and to free Mumia and other political prisoners, we can build a movement that attacks these issues at their root by linking them to the need to overthrow capitalism and the rule of the 1% and replace these obsolete forms of socioeconomic and political organization with those of international socialism and workers' democracy. As striking ILWU members shouted when they led a march of 25,000 through downtown San Francisco on Mumia's birthday in 1999, an injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elliot. Our next speaker is Rachel Wolkenstein, who also served as a lawyer for Mumia. Rachel Wolkenstein was staff counsel for the Partisan Defense Committee from 1974 to December 2010. The PDC was initiated by the Spartacus League as a class struggle, non-sectarian legal and social defense committee championing cases and causes on behalf of the whole working class. In 1985, the PDC began its program of publicity and material support for class war prisoners, including Geronimo Jajaga Pratt, Ruchelle McGee, Ed Poindexter, Ramona Africa and the Move 9, and others. Ramona Africa asked the PDC to take up the case of Mumia Abu Jamal, which they did. Rachel began working with Mumia in 1986. The PDC launched an international campaign for Mumia in 1990. United Front rallies were organized for Mumia in June to July of 1990, featuring trade unionists, civil rights activists, and advocates for ending capital punishment in New York, Philadelphia, the Bay Area, London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney, and Mexico City. Publicity from those events drew support for Mumia in Warsaw, Manila, and across the globe. Rachel and other lawyers associated with the PDC, particularly John Piper, but also Paul Cooperstein and Valerie West, were engaged in research and advocacy on Mumia's behalf. In 1995, Rachel and PDC lawyer John Piper joined the legal team of Leonard Weinglass, Dan Williams, and Steve Hawkins of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. The support staff for Mumia's 1995 to 1998 evidentiary hearings was provided by PDC supporters. All costs of maintaining the travel and other expenses of PDC support staff, legal and otherwise, were paid for by the PDC. No funds were taken from the Legal Defense Fund campaign. Rachel oversaw the preparation as well as the investigation, which led to obtaining the affidavits of key witnesses proving Mumia's innocence: William Singletary in 1990, Veronica Jones in 1996, Pamela Jenkins in 1997, and Billy Cook and Arnold Beverly in 1999, as well as the corroborating evidence. And one thing you should know about Rachel is, in 1995, during Mumia's post-conviction hearing, she was shackled and arrested in the middle of the hearing by Judge Albert Sabo when she demanded that a subpoena issue to the Commissioner of Jurors so that the Commissioner of Jurors could testify to racial bias in the selection of jurors in Philadelphia County. She was shackled, the shackles were removed, she went straight back into the courtroom and went back to defending Mumia. Rachel and John Piper resigned from Mumia's legal team in July 1999 because lead counsel Leonard Weinglass obstructed and refused to present the evidence of Mumia's actual innocence. She was the chief legal consultant for the film Manufacturing Guilt in 2013. Friends, I give you Rachel Goldenstein.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I'm going to have to check my notes from time to time, so if I'm looking away, please forgive me. First, I want to thank Elliot Grossman and Marlene Kamish and Nick Brown very much for presenting and fighting for the evidence of Mumia's innocence, evidence that I and others in the PDC in particular, are part of the legal team, fought for and developed in the years before and during the actual years of the PCRA proceedings from 95 to 99 before we had to leave the case. All right, so I also want to make the point here that, you know, it was 41 years on July 3rd from the date that Mumia was sentenced to death. That's 41 years, 30 of which she spent in solitary confinement on death row, and then also on slow death row after that, meaning life imprisonment. And as Elliot already went through, his latest sixth petition to the Pennsylvania courts was denied on March 30th. And the road ahead for Mumia is extremely difficult. Mumia, I want to make the point that Mumia's only crime on December 9th, 1981, was that he survived being shot and then brutally beaten by the Philadelphia police officers. Mumia had been targeted by FBI's COINTELPRO in 1968 when he was 14 years old and already a spokesman for the Black Panther Party. In the mid-70s, he was an award-winning radio journalist and outspoken supporter of the MOVE organization, critic of police brutality, and known throughout Philadelphia as the voice of the voiceless. Mumia was innocent and framed. It's sort of that simple, and what's behind it is far more complex, having to do with the nature of racist class bias and the injustice of the American legal system. There are two names that most people involved in the movement are not familiar with. One of them is Alfonso Giordano, who was a inspector, third in command in the Philadelphia Police Department at the time of Mumia's arrest. And also Arnold Beverly, who you're familiar with now, in part because of just seeing his video. But by and large, these two names are not discussed, have not appeared in any legal pleadings having to do with Mumia's case, except for the filings that were made by Elliot's team. They were disappeared and basically dismissed in the movement, as well as denied in the legal aspect. Okay, early in my work with Mumia, back in 1987, he shared with me, brought up to me, that Inspector Giordano had been convicted and sentenced for corruption. This was in 1986, he was convicted. I learned about this in 1987, visiting Mumia. Now, Giordano, as I learned in investigating this, was not simply a corrupt cop. He basically was best pals with Rizzo, and he was also best pals with Rizzo, and he was also the head of their SWAT team. And the SWAT team was used to go after the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, when Mumia was already known as a spokesman for it. He also was the officer in charge of the year-long blockade of the MOVE home in Philadelphia, Powelton Village, from 77 to 78, that ended with a police attack on the MOVE supporters, including children who were hiding in the house in the face of the bullet barrages against them in that house, and which led to 30 to 100 year sentences for the MOVE 9. Mumia at that time publicly challenged Rizzo and DA Ed Rendell about the raid, the brutality, and the arrest, and he was threatened by them. Back at the time of the arrest of Faulkner, the shooting of Faulkner, Giordano was on the scene within 3 minutes after the first radio call for backup from Faulkner. He found Mumia already thrown in the police wagon, shot and critically wounded, and beaten by police. And Giordano knew exactly who Mumia was, no question about it. Giordano's first act was to further assault Mumia, hitting him on the head with his baton, hurling racial slurs. Giordano set up the false witness IDs from cab driver Schobert and also from Cynthia White, both of whom Elliot spoke about. Giordano's lying report after the scene was that Mumia confessed, and that was featured in the news. Giordano was the police witness in the pretrial proceedings. It was Giordano who was the main prosecution witness. Come Mumia's trial a few months later, and Judge Sabo ruled that Giordano could testify at Mumia's trial about this false confession. And then without any explanation, Giordano did not to testify, but the prosecution dropped notice of the hospital confession reported 2 months after the shooting, which Elliot spoke a lot about, and I'll come back to that in a particular way later on. The why behind Giordano's absence from the trial and the fabrication of Mumia's hospital confession is explained by the fact that in December 1981, when Faulkner was murdered, Giordano was a target of 3 ongoing federal investigations into police corruption in Philadelphia, including collaboration with organized crime and gambling, prostitution, and drug dealing. We know that from the court records of these prosecutions. We also know that from the affidavit of key FBI confidential informant Donald Persing we got in May 99. His federal trial testimony led to some 30 cop convictions. Those targets included, in addition to Giordano, James Carlini, who was the head of the homicide police department. Also John DiBenedetto, head of the Central Division where Faulkner was assigned, as well as Giordano was mentioned. This was the entire police chain of command in the frame up of and prosecution of Mumia. Now in February 82, Giordano, we learned later, was removed from his inspector command post and transferred to a desk job in the police personnel division. This February 82 was the same time as the prosecution's roundtable meeting with police witnesses and the dates of the new and false police reports of Mumia's hospital confession. And then on the first working day after Mumia was convicted and sentenced to death, July 3rd, Giordano retired from the police force with full pay. This is documented by the police personnel records, which investigators secured. DiBenedetto and other Central Division police officers were convicted on corruption charges and served prison terms. Giordano got a plea deal a few years later. No prison, a modest fine. That's what Mumia had read about and told me about. Back to Giordano in a bit. Okay, Arnold Beverly. Okay, I'm focusing on Giordano and Beverly because they are the unknown, unused by the legal teams, witnesses that pull together all the strings dealing with Mumia's innocence and the fact that he was framed up. So I'm going to go through the Arnold Beverly situation with additional facts that, well, despite all the things that Elliot went through, there's more from the record and from investigation that corroborate what Arnold Beverly said in his confession, which you just saw. So I first interviewed Beverly back in '99, 10 years before he gave his confession. He was a Pennsylvania state prisoner. He told me at that time about the police hit on Faulkner and the why. The undercover cops in white shirts were on the scene where Faulkner would be arranged basically through the work by Billy Cook and Ken Freeman that his police car would stop. That Mumia did not shoot Faulkner, Beverly said. That Mumia was shot by a different cop, not Faulkner, and then beaten and kicked by police. And that Lucky, Cynthia White's street name, who testified that Mumia shot Jesus. Beverly at that time refused to identify the shooter and he insisted then that he would never testify. Now, Beverly's account of this planned hit on Faulkner stayed front of mind in the years to come as John and I worked through working with others in the PDC staff to review the existent trial record, the police reports, the witness reports, the ballistics, the forensics, and the hospital records, and more. There's not enough time, as I said, to recount the details of 10 years of investigation that led to obtaining Beverly's signed confession and what I believe is a full set of corroborative evidence, making clear that what he says is fundamentally correct and true. It's important to note that what I'm talking about is the Beverly evidence, is not just his confession, but the entirety of the corroborative evidence. Now, when Weinglass took up the case, and I have to say that one of my greatest errors was being part of basically convincing Mumia that Weinglass was a good person to have as his attorney. Weinglass wasn't actually hired by Mumia until 1992, when
Rachel, just FYI, 5 minutes.
those of us in the FBI had done, those of us in the PDC had done a lot. All right, so basically, I oversaw a tremendous amount of investigation during that time, even though Weinglass was totally opposed, which include numerous former police, including a former Black FBI agent, former young Philadelphia cop, the head of the Cherry Hill homicide cops, as well as Mike Newman, who Elliot spoke about. The point about Beverly's accounting of the shootings actually is it explains the mess of the entire trial record in history, what was inconsistent, contradictory, improbable, or impossible in the prosecution's case, as revealed in the witness statements and physical evidence. Okay, the evidence that Faulkner was an FBI informant. Pershing confirmed at the time of Faulkner's murder that police under federal investigation were worried about possible police informants. John Piper interviewed the federal prosecutor in those cases, who confirmed that police in that district provided confidential information to the FBI. This prosecutor stated that one of the CIs had a brother who was also a police officer, and this description fit Faulkner. Faulkner had a Topcom camera that was used the night that he was killed to photograph at least one police officer in the precinct. The Topcom camera was an expensive camera model used extensively by the FBI at that period. Police reports indicate the camera was in police possession after the murder, but there are no existing property receipts or records of the camera or any film from the camera. The hit planned against Faulkner corroborated. Not only does Beverly say it, but Bill Cook corroborates that, and that the actions of the first officers on the scene show that they really didn't give a shit, quite frankly, about Faulkner, who was mortally wounded, or the preservation of evidence. For instance, police officers first tried to stuff the severely wounded 6'2" Faulkner into a small police vehicle. And only after that didn't work, he was put into a van for the 2-block ride to Jefferson Hospital. My own interview with the independent photographer, in which he told me that the van with Faulkner did not leave immediately. Photographers, as well as journalists in Washington, show the crime scene was wide open, the evidence was moved, and the putative weapon mishandled, and they were not turned over to ballistics for hours. We know that not only does Beverly say that Mumia did not shoot Faulkner, but neither did eyewitness William Singletary, who gave a deposition in 1990, that Faulkner was already shot when Mumia arrived. Police threatened Singletary and trashed his business as a warning against testifying for Mumia. The cops on the scene, there were like at least a dozen cop cars on the scene immediately. And the first team reporting from the scene arrived prior to the assigned team. Singletary corroborates the white shirts, as well as there were other witnesses that testified at the post-conviction hearing that there were undercover cops, not necessarily the same people that were referenced by Elliot, who appeared to be drunk, men who were drunk or homeless on the scene, and then appeared as soon as shots were fired with their guns drawn and running across the parking lot. Faulkner is shot. Okay, so how Faulkner was shot is very important, and actually it describes the fact he was shot by more than one shooter coming from different directions with weapons of different calibers, explains the location of the bullets and fragments recovered at the scene, the unaccounted for copper bullet jacket at the scene, the absence of divots in the sidewalk, as well as location of sidewalk bloodstains, all of which, because means it's counter to the prosecution scenario. The medical
Rachel,
examiner.
we are on time, so if you could start concluding.
Okay, I will go as quickly as I can. The reason I'm making this point, and I'm sorry it's a bit lengthy, is because the question of the Beverly evidence is basically dismissed within the entire movement and was suppressed, consciously suppressed by the legal counsel for the past 20 years following Elliott's representation. And in it is the core of understanding the extent of the frame up from top to bottom, and basically how it shows the total pressure from the bourgeois state to keep Mumia, convict him and to keep him in prison. There were 5 witness statements, including from 2 police officers, who describe a man at the scene described to be the shooter wearing a green army jacket. Beverly's description of what he was wearing, a green army jacket, corroborates this information already in the file, as does the tear in the leg and the pants. But neither Mumia nor his brother Bill Cook wore a green army jacket. Jamal had a blue quilted ski jacket with a wide red lightning stripe on the right and left front. Cook wore a navy blue style jacket with brass buttons. I personally reviewed all the physical evidence in August 95. Actually, Weinglass basically delegated that to me, though he arguably had tons more experience than me. Beverly was subjected to a polygraph test, and those conclusions were it supported the truthfulness of Beverly's account that he and not Jamal Mumia shot the officer. Now to the Justice Department, I'm going to do this pretty quickly. The importance of the whole question of the Giordano and the hospital confession being done is an expose of the role of the Justice Department having a direct role in manufacturing the trial evidence against Mumia and suppressing the evidence of his innocence. None of the information about this investigation was made public prior to the indictments, which began in 1983. It was all secret at the time that Mumia was shot, that Officer Faulkner was killed. So all evidence, particularly Giordano's loss of his position as inspector and reduced to a desk job in the police personnel office in February, just 2 months after Faulkner's shooting, points to the U.S. Justice Department collusion with DA Edward Brunel in prosecuting Mumia. By withdrawing Giordano's testimony that Mumia confessed to him and inventing the hospital confession, the Justice Department protected its police corruption and prosecutions and sanctioned the fabrication of hospital confession to secure Mumia's frame of conviction. And it was 4 years later that Giordano was pled guilty. I want to interject that all this police corruption had nothing to do with beating up people. It had nothing to do with their misconduct in terms of defendants, which is what part of the so-called movement today wants to make it seem. The Justice Department was doing good in this way. No, these were different types of corruption. And actually the Justice Department to Ed Rendell made clear that Mumia was to be convicted and nothing was going to possibly mess up that conviction by having Giordano testify. So Beverly's confession not only establishes Mumia's innocence, but also laid bare the extent and consciousness of the police and prosecutorial misconduct in convicting Mumia and sentencing to death for a crime they know he did not commit. Is my video off? Sorry about that. Okay, I think I'm having trouble reading my script and having my video. Apologies. All right. Okay, I'm just going to try and fit up without going through my script here. But basically, the point I'll just come to this and do this this way is to make the point that to make the point that this evidence, as I said, was totally,
Rachel,
totally.
we are 5 minutes over, so if you could just wrap up.
Okay, well, I can just stop now if people, I mean, I was getting to one, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Our next panelist is Gerald Smith of the Labor Action Committee to Free Mumia. Gerald has a long history in the Black liberation and socialist movements. He entered as a youth into the civil rights movement as a member of the NAACP. Later, he joined the Black Panther Party and participated in the defense of the New York Panther 21. After the demise of the Panthers, Gerald did an extensive study, embraced orthodox scientific socialism, and joined the Spartacus League. He started defending Mumia when he found out about the case in 1987 as a member of the Spartacus League's Partisan Defense Committee and is an original member of the Labor Action Committee to Free Mumia. He has since participated in the anti-death penalty struggle, including the case of Gary Graham and Rodney Reed, among others, and continues to fight for the freedom of Mumia and other political prisoners. We're going to start off before Gerald presents with two videos that illustrate the points that Gerald is trying to make. One is the video of the 1999 West Coast port shutdown by the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, during which 25,000 marched through the streets of San Francisco. And the other video is a video of the action by NUMSA, the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, the largest union in South Africa, when they did an action for Mumia earlier this year. Turn it up a little bit, please.
Dock workers say Saturday's a big overtime day to move tons of goods that come through ports. And they say nothing was moved on the day shift today. Instead, longshore workers, labor leaders, and social activists made a 2-hour march through San Francisco to protest.
Hold on.
Well, this was the active Free Mumia movement, and we were probably about 3,000 strong. I know that, you know, our email list was 3,000 strong. So we held a series of demonstrations and rallies and forums about it.
Dock workers say Saturday's a big overtime day to move tons of goods that come through ports. And they say nothing was moved on the day shift today. Instead, longshore workers, labor leaders, and social activists made a 2-hour march through San Francisco to protest and try to stop the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal, convicted of killing a Philadelphia police officer 18 years ago.
I think people are recognizing that what we're experiencing really is a crisis in democracy. It's not only about Mumia Abu-Jamal, it's about a prison system that is larger and larger, and that focuses on punishment for profit.
Dock workers say today's the day to come here instead of going to work. That stop work rallies affect all 22 ports along the West Coast.
Whether you're Chicano, Native American, we got to do
Another rally in Philadelphia drew more than 3,000 people, some from as far away as France.
What we want to tell the workers in Pennsylvania is that what the Longshore Union is doing out here in California, they can do in Pennsylvania and save the life of Mumia Abu-Jamal. If the black transit workers in Philadelphia and the bus drivers and the steel workers in Pittsburgh decided that this is an important case, as we have decided, then it's in their power to stop the death machine.
So now we're going to show the National Union of Metal Workers. They have also joined our international campaign, and Ellen Jim is going to talk about Mumia from South Africa.
The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, with a history of struggle against the brutal apartheid system of South Africa with more than 350,000 members, has launched an international solidarity campaign for the release of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who has been in prison for the last 42 years.
The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, led by its General Secretary Ivan Jim, has made an appeal to the judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia County in the United States of America, Honorable Judge Lucretia Clemons, to consider releasing Mumia Abu-Jamal from jail. We spoke to the General Secretary, and this is what he had to say.
Well, today, as tomorrow start, from the 16th to the 16th of March, as the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, we're launching our international solidarity campaign in full support of the release of Mumia, who has been a political prisoner, a leader and a soldier of freedom and love of all people of the world, who has been wrongly kept in jail. And we're calling on the judges in the United States of America that in his appeal this time around, he should be released and be set free. There's absolutely no basis for him to be kept in prison. This is a campaign that we've waged over many, many years, separated by rivers and forests, with the people of the United States, who have taken a very solid line in saying Mumia must be released. This campaign will be a rolling campaign that we will embark upon towards the 16th, because we of the view that the judges should not do anything else except to set him free. And this is a demand to say he's a political prisoner who has been a victim of wrongful arrest. He must be released. Justice must be done, and we will not rest beyond the 16th to embark on an international campaign. And our message to the judges: do the noble thing, make sure that justice prevail, release Mumia. He deserves his freedom.
This militant Union of Metal Workers in South Africa has promised to mobilize all progressive workers and organizations to embark on a month-long solidarity campaign to have their comrade Mumia Abu-Jamal released from prison. For Telesur English, I'm Clever Banganai reporting from Johannesburg, South Africa.
Okay, can I start? Yes. Okay. This all begins with the political perspective. Program first. We had to find out, we had to learn, thank you very much, sir. We had to learn how to organize. So the Labor Action Committee, we started off as a part of the Free Mumia movement, and we were, happy to try to contact the unions and to spur proletarian action, contacting unions, trying to build strike rallies or stuff like that for Mumia. We ran into the problem of some of the members of the Free Mumia movement wanted to soft pedal our critique of the trade union leadership. That would not work. You have to, it is our responsibility to criticize the trade union leadership where they faltered. They can be an obstacle to the development of class consciousness, and therefore we sometimes oppose them. That's how we got started. Okay. Now, the perspective of organizing workers to defend themselves against bourgeois oppression did not start yesterday, okay? And it did not start with the Labor Action Committee. I want to bring you through a history. I'm hoping that, you know, I understand, and thank you so much for listening to the legal history of Mumia Abu-Jamal. I found out about him in 1987, before some of you were born. And I'm going to tell you something. We need young people. You can't have, I know, you know, I ain't dead yet. I'm still struggling, but you know what? We need young people. Young people need to step up and take this case forward. And I'm hoping that you will learn from the legacy that we are trying to unfold for you, because that is the route to Mumia's freedom, and not only Mumia's freedom, but the freedom of all coming revolutionaries who will develop in the barrios, in the ghettos, in the workplaces. This story is not over, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so Mumia and class struggle defense. So what is class struggle defense? What does it mean? It means, from a political perspective, that the working class has a specific interest in justice when we go on strike and they arrest us. What do? Well, we have developed a policy and an understanding of how to best organize through 100 years. For instance, it starts off, it doesn't start off with, it start off, you know, early Spartacus, all right, under the Romans, but we started to codify and understand the policy of, you know, what we use, the tactics and the strategy of class struggle defense. It starts off with Mr. Dreyfus. Dreyfus was an officer in the French army. He was falsely accused of selling secrets to the Germans. He was accused by the French military leadership, and then the anti-Semites, the Catholics, the clerics, turned it, you know, they started publishing all kind of ugly stuff. We need to kill this Jew. How do we let these Yids in our army? All this kind of ugly anti-Semitic stuff. Now, so what happened? He was convicted, but he was innocent. Here's where the socialist movement came involved. The socialist movement started off with the Second International, and they built the unions for the working class. We built cooperatives, consumer cooperatives. We organized the young pioneers to take the working class children out of the cities in the summertime. We built with the working class valid and longstanding institutions that were for the working class, that were working class institutions. And we started to get to attract voters. Millions of people voted for the Socialist Party. We're talking 1890s all the way to World War I, okay? Now, when you strike, you're taking a hostile position against your employer. Your employer has influence with the state. What do you do if they, well, we started to learn. Lenin actually made, and I wanna share this. Sorry. Okay. Lenin made a comment, and I think it's from what is to be done, and it's worthwhile. Lenin was saying, look, the Social Democrats' ideal, this is from What is to be Done, an essay that he wrote in 1901. The Social Democrats' ideal should not be the trade union secretary, but the tribune of the people, who is able to react to every manifestation of tyranny and oppression, no matter where it appears, no matter what stratum or class of the people it affects, who is able to generalize all these manifestations and produce a single picture of police violence and capitalist exploitation, who is able to take advantage of every event, however small, in order to set forward before all his socialist convictions and his democratic demands in order to clarify for all and everyone the world historic significance of the struggle for the emancipation of the proletariat. That's the perspective that we start with. That's the bedrock, okay? Now, so that's what we want our young people to understand. We're not just interested in a wage increase. We're not just interested, in things in retirement, for instance. We are, but not just. We want to convince you to become tribunes of the people, generally speaking, for justice, against police brutality, against police terror, for instance. Okay, so the group in the United States that took this on was called the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. They were the ones out there fighting in the lumber, the lumber yards and on the waterfront. They actually, their philosophy was, we want one big union, but they found out that you can't have one big union if they lock you up. So you have to have a policy to defend what? Class war prisoners. Class war prisoners. And indeed they did. So very quickly, Dreyfus was finally freed, okay, because the socialist movement got behind the Dreyfus case. Some of the so-called economist types did not think that, we call them today colorblind socialists. They didn't think that it was important, what was happening with Dreyfus. But actually, what this led to, one was Dreyfus's freedom in 1906. He was actually, we won the case, but also the French officer corps was severely discredited as liars for accusing this man of something he did not do. But also we have the clerics were discredited. The Catholics leadership was discredited for all this ugly anti-Semitic propaganda that they were putting out. And as a result of becoming the tribunes of the people, this led to millions of Jews identifying with socialism as their movement. Oh yeah. And if you look at the situation, this starts to be a situation because the Jews were attacked in pogroms all over the world. They were attacked. Sometimes the Black Hundreds would attack them in Russia. They were attacked everywhere. Okay. All right. Finally, so the IWW started to actually carry this out in the United States. There was Big Bill Haywood, for instance, Big Bill Haywood was the General Secretary and Treasurer of the IWW. He was also the leader of the Western Federation of Miners. Well, the Western Federation, okay, good. The Western Federation of Miners, basically, what did they use? They used dynamite. So if you try to break their strike, well, they used tools that were available to them. And as a result, Big Bill was convicted and sent to prison for leading a strike. 50,000 people showed up, trade unionists showed up in Boston in his defense. He was eventually released and he had to go into exile. He died in 1928 and was buried in the Russian, in that wall, the Great Wall. Say it? The Great Wall in Kremlin. Thank you. Now, I got to go. I only have 5 minutes, please. Yeah, here you go. So, but here's the point. The point is Joe Hill also was falsely accused of, killing somebody in a grocery store robbery. He was once again innocent, framed, and he was executed in 1915. But in the process of defending him, we brought together the IWW, the AFL, and the Socialist Party. In other words, unity is what we need, nonpartisan unity and non-sectarian unity to bring all political tendencies together that purport to defend the working class. And that's what we did. While we weren't successful and he was shot by a firing squad, we now know what to do. Later on, the James Cannon formed the ILD, the International Labor Defense, and they learning from this situation with Joe Hill, learning from Big Bill Hayward, they were able to start on a higher political level with Sacco and Vanzetti. Once again, we were not successful in saving their lives, but once again, we knew what to do. And we made that an international campaign. Finally, with the Scottsboro Boys in 1930, we made a case that was happening every day. They would lynch Black people every day. Well, not this time. The Communist Party got together with the ILD and various unions and various Black organizations, and basically they saved the lives of the Scottsboro Boys. And this was the first time where they stopped racists from killing innocent Black people. And, I can go on about that case, but I just want you to know, that's what the Labor Action Committee, that's what we're based on, that perspective. So we go on now, and I do want to just really quickly say, with this new trial versus, freedom of Mumia, when I was involved, it was very clear to me, and I'm lucky to have been associated with Elliot and Rachel. So I understood we didn't want to ask for a new trial. That's not, we wanted Mumia to be free. Example, Hurricane Carter. Hurricane Carter asked for a new trial. He wound up with 3 new trials before he was finally released. Geronimo Pratt. Geronimo Pratt knew he was innocent. He didn't ask for a new trial. And when they got the new information, he was simply released. So that's what we wanted to do for Mumia. We wanted him out. We didn't want no new trials if we didn't have to. Okay, I will go on now. Okay, in New Trial of Freedom, 1998. Once again, perspective. It starts with the way you think with your program. Program first. We wanted the workers to come out for Mumia. Well, there was a group called Teachers for Mumia. And we went to the rep council of the teachers and said, look, we want to have a day for Mumia against the death penalty and in defense of Mumia. And the majority of teachers voted for it. So now we had a day for Mumia. So there's a lot, I can't get into all the details, but it actually occurred. We had Bobby Seale there. We had all kinds of, Hurricane Carter came, didn't he? And other people that opposed the death penalty. And, it was a, thank you very much. Time, what's this say? Time is up. You know what? Let me just finish with this, and that is that not only, we try to not, we know that we're not lawyers in the LAC, but we work with lawyers. We listen to them and they educate us. And as a result, we have been somewhat successful. For instance, Mumia, there was a gag law against Mumia October 14th, 2014. They actually wanted Mumia to not make any more commentaries. We defeated that. We defeated it. In other words, if you have the understanding and hookup and the international perspective, you can defeat reaction sometimes in the courtroom. I'm going to stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. At the beginning of this panel, I noted that today is the anniversary of the hunger strike. And here to give us a brief presentation on the strike is Minister King, who was a participant in the strike. King.
Great. Get right over there.
All power to the people. Hey, first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me on this panel. My brother, I see Richard here. I see Judy here. Thank you, Gerald, for the wonderful presentation. I want to thank you for the litigation that you're doing for Mumia. I know coming up next month on the first weekend of August, we having an event for Liberate Our Elders. And Mumia, actually his campaign, Fear, Love Not Fear, is gonna be part of this whole panel. It's gonna be the first national panel that we bring in the California prisoners, the political prisoners with the West, the South, the East. This is gonna be something that I want you all to get involved because we having a conversation that's a big conversation. When we talk about Mumia, Mumia is an elder. So this is why I came home and put boots on the ground and said, liberate our elders everywhere. I just left Atlanta talking about this same conversation with Jaleel Mutakin and all these elders. And I'm compassionate right now because we just lost an elder I think it was day before yesterday, Mutulu Shakur. We got to talk about that. That's his comrade. That's his brother. So I had a speech that I wanted to tell you all about, but I also got an elder that's on the phone who been waiting. This is one of my comrades, my brother. Baridi is one of the elders in California. This is how I came home, because these principal thinkers was able to establish a historical document, what we call the Agreement to End Hostilities. California Prison Focus is the only organization, and we ought to be ashamed of ourselves. This is the only organization to promote this historical document on the street in the flatland. So we talking about when they're having violence behind the wall, we're addressing this as a mediation team. And it don't just stop here in California. It's violence inside and outside everywhere. So I need you guys' help, especially the attorneys, because we got people that's been incarcerated for 40 and 50 years, just now coming home with no adequate resources. So we fired up about Mumia. We fired up about any elder that's behind the wall right now because the UN already found them guilty of genocide, 5 counts of genocide. And this is why California had the Mandela rules. So Baridi, tell them a little bit about yourself and how we've been struggling inside and out.
Power to the people. Thank you for that presentation. And thank y'all for hearing me. This is what I like to share. My name is Baridi Wilson. I am one of the principal negotiators and principal representatives of the California Historical Prison Hall site. And I want to share with you what Mumia, how he intersected in our lives and allowed me to be able to actually have a bi-coastal experience in as a jailhouse lawyer in the collective struggle across the board. And Mumia, in his work, Mumia versus USA, I'm reading this book and going out to court, and then the guards at the courthouse jump and beat this guy down. And I know the guy is in solitary confinement, so he didn't have access to the necessary legal work. So what I did is I went and read Mumia's book. Then I went and studied the law, learned what I had to do. I filed a lawsuit on behalf of this guy. I don't even know who he was. I just got his name and information. I filed a lawsuit. And from that point, this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. I began the journey of activism. And Mumia's struggle in solitary confinement helped us a lot, because we had to deal with some serious threats where they was trying to put us to death. And so to have us in there, and I would ask y'all to imagine being in your bathroom or a big walk-in closet, and then with no windows, nothing to see out, in there, living in that space for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for not just years, for me 25 years, and never seeing no grass, never seeing no trees, never seeing no sun, no clouds, no moon, no stars, and to be able to struggle through that, we had to starve ourselves to death. There's 4 of us died just to bring that explosion of light. And Mumia, I want to give a shout out and thank Mumia for acknowledging us and helping us in support of that historical home strike. That's why I'm here to be able to speak to y'all today. And the reason why we have elders in there that's they slated for death is because they got a corrupt board system. The parole board do not give parole dates out to particular elders of color, especially if you commit to the struggle. If you commit to the struggle and you're about upliftment, education, you're gonna endure long term inside until you're near death. So on that spirit, and to be able to fight through that and stay strong and stay in solidarity with the people, that's why I want to give a shout out to Brother Mutulu Shakur and his family. Condolences to them. You forever in our spirit, and in that spirit, free Mumia, liberate our elders. Thank y'all.
So I just want to thank you all, and as a reminder, just, it's about that shared humanity that you just talked about. Richard know my story. He got proximity. Judy know my story. I take this serious. I came home and got arrested for saying liberate our elders. And I don't feel no shame about it. I'm still a student though. So let's stay in this fight together. Free them all.
Thank you, King. I just want to let you all know that we have a pamphlet, Mumia Abu Jamal and the Labor Movement, that describes some of the history of class struggle defense. It's available over at the LAC table. We also have copies of the resolution that was passed by the South African workers when they engaged in their action earlier this year, and you can also get that at the table. Now, yeah, we're a little bit over because leftists like to talk, but we want to have a short discussion round. If anyone wants to, have discussion or ask questions, we'll take a few. Please limit your contributions to 2 minutes, and you do have to speak into the mic in order for the people to hear you. So if anyone has any questions, yes, brother, I'm going to give you the mic.
I wanted to ask you about are you still working with the law school in LA? Are you still teaching at the law school in LA?
I'm not teaching at the law school at present. Okay, but I should mention, I did teach at People's College of Law in Los Angeles, which is founded by the National Lawyers Guild and I believe an organization of African-American attorneys and Chicano attorneys organization quite a while back, and still exists.
Thank you.
Yes, brother.
I'm a longtime member of the Black Panther Party since 1968. I go by the name Broken Cloud. And my wondrous direction is sending me to the outskirts, since I am looking for the younger generation to walk behind my movements. I'm just curious. I've been a socialist all my life, probably. The direction we need to go in apprehending this constant collection of new political prisoners. We're dealing with something that's 42 years old, but just in 2004 and 2003, we had coups in um, 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 South America with the and in Egypt we had we got Sisi and we got trillions of liberators in Egypt probably and we just got a problem that we really need to work on with apprehending and bringing a complete stop to this capitalist incursion on putting the positive under duress while we're still fighting for 42 years later, people who are, and still these people who have been incarcerated since 2005, which is the younger people who I'm looking to follow in my footsteps. We really need to find a way to bring a close to this capitalist system. There you go.
We'll take a few more comments and then go back to the panelists, if there's anybody. Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank all the panelists for their contributions. I was especially impressed by Brother Sanders, Smith, excuse me, presentation. Earlier, David Newton, Huey Newton's nephew, was here. He had to leave, but the ILW Local 10 has played an important role in Mumia's defense for a long, long time now. And just this year, we sent a delegation of 14 to South Africa. And it was Newt, that's what we call him on the waterfront, Newt and myself, who went up to meet with Irvin Jim, the General Secretary of NUMSA, and encouraged them and persuaded them to have a mass demonstration, which you saw in the video, at the US Embassy, and to send a letter to Judge Clemens. And on top of that, they had that videotape that Irvin Jim did. So it's really important to have an international working class perspective in the whole defense. And that's what Gerald underscored. I appreciate that. I would encourage people to buy Elliot Grossman's book. There are still a few left over here. I've been defending Mumia since 1988 in the ILWU, and there's always something to learn. And in the opening pages of his book, he talked about Billy Cook, his brother, who had a trial before Mumia's. And in that trial, McGill, the DA, says that Mumia doesn't need a lineup. Mumia wanted a lineup to prove that he was innocent. McGill says, you don't need it. There's only 3 people that were present then: Mumia, his brother Billy, and Officer Faulkner. Yet what we found out later in Mumia's trial is that Cynthia White said that there were no other people there, but she was. You know, this comes out in Elliot's book. That's just one of the facts. There are so many. And I think the important thing that I got out of Elliot's book was the constructive denial of counsel. And I'd like you to explain that clearly, because as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the big roadblocks to unity in defending Mumia Abu-Jamal. Thank you.
So could I
Thank you, Jack.
respond to that? Or do you-
Should we take one more and then we'll go
Yeah.
back to you? Okay. Okay. I don't know who was first, but do you want to go, Christina?
It's kind of very hard for me what I'm going to say, but it's always like this. What I said is not very famous. But I've been involved in the fight for Mumia from the beginning. We were some of the people who began the organizing for the freedom of Mumia. At the time, I was working with the Socialist Action, not a member of Socialist Action, but working with them on the struggle for the freedom of Mumia. And I never forget at one meeting when I was told, and I witnessed here, that if I did not denounce, I was threatened, that if I did not denounce the lawyer, what was the lawyer name that you were talking about?
Leonard Wine.
Yeah, Leonard Weinglass. I had to quit the movement. That was sad. I want to say that we need to unite on the freedom of these men on the basis of the truth. I don't know, Leonard Weinglass is dead, so I'm not going to, he has no way to defend himself. I'm sure there are all kinds of situations, but what we need to focus is the fact that Mumia is a political prisoner, is a Black political prisoner, and that his freedom is our freedom, and that we need to do everything in our power to free these men. That's what I want to focus on. Do anything in our power to free these men, because his freedom is our freedom. We need to put all this fighting aside and focus on the fact that maybe that guy made a lot of mistakes and the wrong thing, but the one who's keeping Mumia in jail is the fucking system, nothing else. And we need to fight the system, and we need to focus on that system in order to get Mumia free. That's the only way, because we were part of the struggle to get Mumia to be set to take away the death penalty from him. It was not just the lawyers, I give you credit for it, but it was the international movement, the working class movement, the people on the street demanding the freedom of Mumia. So we need to do that. We need to depend on ourselves. I respect the lawyers. I'm glad we work with the lawyers, but it is the people who has the power and the only one that can do it. So please keep it in our mind that we need to organize, all of us, young and old, Black and blue and whatever colors and whatever political beliefs. It is up to us, brothers and sisters. It is up to us. If we don't look at it that way, we'll never win the freedom of Mumia or any political prisoner, which I doubt very much under this system. And I agree, we need socialism. That's different. We need to fight it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I'm just going to add a question from Zoom. This is from Stan Woods. For a period in the 1990s, numerous more mainstream progressive organizations like the NAACP defended Mumia. Now they are no longer involved. Is that the case? And if so, any idea why? I'll turn it over to the panelists now.
Yeah, Mr. Woods doesn't get his facts right, unfortunately, because I remember the NAACP did not support Mumia initially. Oh yeah, oh yeah. But patience, gentlemen. We kept banging at them and banging at them and banging at them, and eventually they filed a brief in favor of Mumia. So one was a lesson: don't give up. Don't give up on institutions or people. If you know you're right, keep fighting. Now, also, I wanted to just point out, I was trying to, internationally, here's who supported Mumia in this last fight, February, when the last, he had his chance to go to court again. Japan. In Japan, the Jirochiba people, these are railroad workers. They organized at the US Embassy. They were stopped by the police in their march. And I thought it was rather strange that the police, Japanese police, were collaborating with the US Embassy to stop a Mumia demonstration. But that's what happened. Brazil, in Brazil, a bunch of steel workers got together for Mumia. In Mexico City, there was a minor demonstration for Mumia. In France, they actually have named a street after Mumia. That's right. In England, we have had several demonstrations for Mumia. And I cannot recall specifically what was most recently done, but also in South Africa, you see, and also Durban, South Africa, the longshoremen got together, an almost endless list that won't be missed when young people will come into this movement and remember for me. Thank you.
So I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points that Chris made, which I thought were interesting and important. He was talking about the fact that Billy Cook, Mumia's brother, was put on trial before Mumia was put on trial, and Cynthia White testified at both of those trials. They put Billy Cook on trial for interference with a police officer because of his altercation, if you want to call it that, with Officer Faulkner. The important thing is, not only did Cynthia White testify at both of these trials, Joe McGill was the same prosecutor at both of the trials. At Billy Cook's trial, Cynthia White specifically testified that no one else was present at the crime scene except for Officer Faulkner, Billy Cook, and Mumia. Oh, I'm sorry. I got it reversed. Let me try that again. Strike that, as we say in court. At Mumia's trial, McGill specifically asked Cynthia White if anyone else was present at the crime scene besides those three people, Mumia, Billy Cook, and Officer Faulkner. She said no. However, at Billy Cook's trial, she testified there was a passenger in Billy Cook's car. And when Officer Faulkner pulled the car over, the passenger got out. That is very significant because now we know from Billy Cook's declaration who that passenger was. That was Kenneth Freeman. That was one of the shooters. That was one of the people in the plot to kill Officer Faulkner. So that was intentionally concealed at Mumia's trial. And obviously, Cynthia White wouldn't do that on her own. It had to be because the prosecutor told her what to say and what not to say. And the prosecutor, under the law, it is illegal and a violation of the ethical code for attorneys to present knowingly false information to any court. So when Cynthia White testified in Mumia's trial that no one else was present at the crime scene, after I've already testified in front of McGill at Billy Cook's trial that there was a passenger who got out, it was the obligation of the prosecutor to say, Your Honor, I must bring to the attention of the court and the jury that that's not true. But obviously, we know what really happened there. And that's a very important point because that's additional evidence that supports Billy Cook's account of what happened and, you know, showing the misconduct. But additionally, it shows another example of ineffective representation by Mumia's trial attorney, which is a violation of Mumia's constitutional rights to be adequately represented by an attorney, because the attorney representing him had a copy of the transcript of Cynthia White's testimony at Billy Cook's trial in his hands while he was cross-examining Cynthia White at Mumia's trial. And we know that because he makes a reference to that. When you read the transcript, there's a reference to that, and he asks some questions based upon what Cynthia White testified to at Billy Cook's trial. But he never confronted Cynthia White about the passenger. If he had brought up the passenger business, he would have destroyed Cynthia White's credibility at Mumia's trial, and he also would have destroyed the entire prosecution case, because he also could have brought up that this prosecutor here was present. He knows that Cynthia White just lied to you, and he didn't bring it up. If he had only done that, Mumia would not have been convicted. And in terms of Leonard Weinglass, this is another issue that he did not raise that he should have raised. And we tried to get him to raise it, before we came onto the case, because the appellate attorney for Mumia, who was appointed, who was completely ineffective, should have raised on the first appeal the fact that the trial attorney was ineffective and not cross-examining Cynthia White about the passenger and didn't do it. That, in addition to 9 other examples that we found that we raised in our legal papers, there were 10 examples, 10 of them, including the one about Cynthia White and the passenger, where the appellate attorney was ineffective in violation of Mumia's constitutional rights by not raising the ineffectiveness of the trial attorney. And that's another example of, Leonard Weinglass. So Chris brought up this idea of constructive denial of counsel. And that is exactly the problem that we had. Because when we came onto the case and we found the confession of Arnold Beverly, the declaration of Billy Cook, and we also found other things where Leonard Weinglass was not ineffective. I knew Leonard Weinglass. This is a whole other story, but he was an intelligent, a highly competent attorney. But something went very wrong with Mumia's case because he did things that cannot be explained as anything other than intentional sabotage. And the problem we had was when you discover new evidence in Pennsylvania and you want to present it after someone's trial, you only have 60 days. And now they've changed it to a year. But at that time, you had 60 days to present it to a court from the time that you found it. Otherwise, no court would hear it. So when Weinglass and Williams buried that evidence, they blew that 60-day deadline. And there is no right to effective representation by counsel in post-conviction proceedings. You don't have that same right that you have at trial and appeal. The only way that we had any chance of getting a court to hear that evidence was to use the doctrine of constructive denial of counsel, which comes from the Cronic case, Cronic versus United States, where the court held if you have an attorney who violates their duty of loyalty to you, it goes beyond ineffectiveness, where they're actually sabotaging your case, and that in effect, what you have is not only no attorney on your side, but actually a second prosecutor. That violates your constitutional rights. And that was the issue that we raised to the court. And that was why we had no choice but to attack Leonard Weinglass under that doctrine, because it was the only legal pathway to get them to even look at and consider the confession of Arnold Beverly, the lie detector test that showed he was telling the truth, the declaration of Billy Cook explaining about Kenneth Freeman, and the other examples we had of where points that should have been raised were not raised and therefore were thrown in the trash can. The only way to get the court to look at that again and consider it was by raising that. So we had no choice. The only thing we could do would be to be a party to how Leonard Weinglass had betrayed Mumia, and the same way that John Piper and Rachel Walkenstein had no choice but to resign from that legal team, we had no choice but to present that to the court. If we had not done that, we would have been as guilty as Weinglass and Williams were of betraying Mumia, and we were unwilling to do that for political reasons, for ethical reasons as attorneys, and for our own individual ethical reasons. If we didn't do that, we had no business being lawyers, and we should have just burned our bar cards the way people used to burn their draft cards in the old days. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
No, that's part of the picture. And if you want to leave part of reality out, then you're not dealing with reality.
Wait a minute,
That's it. You need to attack everything that's the problem. Because we've got a bourgeois court system that isn't fair or just, and because we have reformist tendencies who do not support what we needed to do at that time. If instead of the reformists who refused to support the Arnold Beverly evidence and bring it out there to the public, if we had had united movement raising hell over Arnold Beverly and Billy Cook and the fact that Mumia is actually innocent, instead of capitulating to the shit lids that they wanted to capitulate to because they're afraid to
because they were afraid to expose the extent of the corruption in the police department, because they didn't believe that our legal system could possibly be a legal system where the police and the prosecutor would engage in this kind of unethical conduct. If that had been exposed, Mumia would have been freed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing about this question of constructive abandonment? Can you hear me?
Rachel, we are at 2.5 hours and we do need to leave the space at some point. So, respectfully, I'm going to end the panel at this point. I do want to let you all know, we do have copies of Elliot's book over at the table. We also have a sign-up sheet. So if we run out of copies, you can indicate whether you want a PDF or a print copy of the book, and we will contact you so that you can get a copy. And we do have a little bit of time, so the panelists will still be around. You're welcome to debate, share your opinions, polemicize if that is what you want. And thank you all so much for coming.
And some of us are going over to Sycamore to continue arguing and talking and have a few drinks, and anyone who would like to come with us is warmly invited to do so.
Yep, because that's what leftists do. Thank you.
No. Okay, Jack, good to see you.
We didn't.